We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
This is Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. The website bookedonrock.com. Producer Mark Howard is our guest to talk about his brand new book, Recording Icons, Creative Spaces, the creative world of Mark Howard. Mark Howard has always made unique records. For Howard, it's not just about the recording process. Making great music is also about creating unique, comfortable environments designed to bring out the best in the artist. To this end, he spent a career seeking out architecturally remarkable spaces in which to make albums. In Recording Icons, Creative Spaces, you're invited behind the curtain to watch these music industry legends create. Using a non-invasive photographic approach, employing a Nikon time-lapse camera to capture these in-studio moments, Howard captures the hits as they happen in a treasure trove of non-posed, natural images. You're invited to travel the world with him and watch as he creates the beautiful spaces and inspiring atmosphere where the magic of classics by Bob Dylan, U2, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, and many more actually happened. Mark Howard is a producer and recording engineer. He's worked with countless multi-million selling record artists, including Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tom Waits, The Tragically Hip, Lucinda Williams, Willie Nelson, Marianne Faithfull, Emmylou Harris, Peter Gabriel, R.E.M., and the Neville Brothers. A playlist of some of the songs Mark talks about in this episode are on the show notes page. First, let's get the stories behind those songs. Here is Mark Howard. Mark Howard, thanks for being on the podcast.
No worries. I'd love to be here.
In the description of the book, it says, quote, for Howard, it's not just about the recording process. Making great music is also about creating unique, comfortable environments designed to bring out the best in the artist. I'm curious as to what inspired you to incorporate architecture and interior design with recording music.
I think I've been kind of doing this for so long. It's like, I don't know, but like I was a drummer when I was like 9 years old. And then by the time I was 15, I'd taken over the basement, and I kind of like had couches down there and kind of had a cool environment. So I've always kind of like been kind of doing it since a kid. But I think the thing is to be able to kind of make it comfortable for the artist and make them feel that they're not intimidated by the amount of equipment in the room. And sometimes when you walk in a recording studio, it can be intimidating to have all this gear all lined up, and so and be distractive at the same time. So I don't have a screen usually, and I just kind of, you got to use your ears to listen back instead of Pro Tools looking at a screen, using your eyes to listen. So I think that it's important that the artist is comfortable to perform.
And you choose some interesting locations. You open the book with stories of recording at the Paramore studio in Los Angeles. You spotted this one while you were riding your Harley around the Silver Lake neighborhood, a mansion that was once owned by silent screen star Antonio Marino. I think that's how it's pronounced, yep. Marino. Yep. What was it that drew you to this location? You write that it was like a music sanctuary.
Well, like I said, I was just kind of riding around the neighborhood on my bike, and I saw a set of gates open, and I drove in. I was like, this is amazing. And I said, what goes on here? And I got introduced to Dana, the woman that owned the place. And she said, look, I usually make films here, but I've gone over my, you're only allowed to film so many days in residential area. So she'd gone over her days that she was allowed to film. And so I said, look, I got about 5 records coming up. Let me make them here. And so we talked, and we made a deal in it, and it just kind of fell together. It was just one of those things I wasn't expecting to have anything preconceived or anything.
Some beautiful shots in the book too. You got
look
in the pool.
Incredible, yeah. So that was like you said it was like a sanctuary, but it was a 22-room mansion. So, and it was kind of like in the shape of a U. So it had 2 wings on each side with that big, huge marble pool in the center. So I invited some friends to make some records there at the same time I was working there. So I had like Sarah McLachlan and her producer Pierre Marchand in one of the wings, and they brought their piano, and it looked out over the city. And then the other wing on the other side, I had Fiona Apple, And so she was working with her producer in that wing, and I was in the main room, which is kind of like a big, huge kind of ballroom. And I was working with Lucinda Williams on her record there. So it was, but we worked, nobody saw each other because everybody had schedules. Sarah would work from 7 in the morning till noon. I would start at 1 till 11 at night. And then Fiona would work from midnight till 7 in the morning.
Wow. And all these photos, by the way, are in the book so people can see.
Yeah.
Sheryl Crow too, right?
Cheryl, yeah, she came through, yeah. And so, yeah, and it became like a kind of like a musical kind of like place to kind of make records. It was really great.
Now, how about the story of the Kingsway studio in New Orleans? This may be my favorite in the book. This is like a scene out of a movie. How did you discover this spot? And can you describe the condition it was in when you first saw it?
Yeah, well, first of all, the character that I was with was this woman she was like the woman that made all the voodoo dolls and in the quarter, and she dressed all in black, and she was kind of like Elvira. She was like, and she had this voice, and she's like, see this house over here? And like, I said, oh yeah, that looks cool. That'd be a cool place to make a record. And she goes, I'll show you to you right now. And she made me hop over all these fences, and we were in the backyard of the Kingsway place, and she yells at this guy, Teddy, are you there? And this guy, old guy, security guy, came out. And so he let us in the house, and we walked through the house, and it was pretty incredible, but it was pretty run down. Probably 20 years of the roof leaking and shag rugs, just, rotted and just dead, cockroaches. And it was really rough. And so I had told Daniel Lanois about it. We were just finished making a record with Bob Dylan, which was which was Oh Mercy. And that was uptown in New Orleans. And so he asked me about this house, and I said, no, it's too far gone. It would take a lot of work to make it happen. And I said, let's just move on. We were about to move to Mexico, and we were going to take the whole rig down to Mexico and work down there. And so he ended up getting sidetracked. This woman convinced him to buy this house for whatever reason. So he bought it. And so it was the biggest family dwelling in the French Quarter. It was like a beautiful big villa and big set of gates on the front. So once he bought it, I was responsible for putting a team together to kind of get it into shape so we could, use it as a studio. And so within a month, I had a guy called Jimmy Mack come in with a crew of guys from the Jazz Fest. So I usually hired those guys to move my gear, but they're all carpenters too, right? So they kind of like did a real fast, stained the floors all dark brown, painted the walls, and, took out all the rugs and all that. So I got it in pretty good shape that it was livable anyways. And we ended up, I had to kind of like become the guy that furnished the place. And I had to go to all these auctions and buy big 4-poster beds and kind of like fill it all in so people could stay there and stuff. And then I went to New York, and I got the API console out of the record plant. That was it. And so that was the console that Jimi Hendrix had done Electric Ladyland on.
Oh, cool.
Electric Ladyland wasn't done yet, so he ended up finishing it at that studio. And so I brought that console down and installed it in the big ballroom inside the house. And then that was only supposed to be for private, for Dan's records and records that I produced and another friend of ours, Malcolm Byrne. And so I produced a bunch of records there, and so did Malcolm. So it became a point where Dan and the woman that showed us the house, they had some disagreement between the two of them, and so she tried to sue him and all this stuff. So we didn't want anything to do. So we left, and we ended up on the West Coast in California, and the studio ran for another 10 years, but not with us there.
Speaking of California, Oxnard, California, another location you happened to come upon unexpectedly.
Yeah, another one.
Teatro Studio, a great nighttime black and white shot of the theater, is in the book.
Okay, yeah.
The history of this location is interesting because it was once a Mexican porn cinema.
Yeah.
How did you discover this one, and what drew you to it?
Well, I was, driving up the coast again, just had the studio in San Francisco, in the warehouse district up there, and so I was just driving up and I saw just said for rent, and so I wrote the number down. And once I got to Frisco, I called the number, and the guy said he wanted $1,500 a month for the place. And again, it was in ruins. You open the door and there's the popcorn machine, and it's full of mold, and all the curtains are all torn and smell bad. And so I ended up making a deal with him, and so I said, look, I'll give you 6 months rent up front, and let me kind of do whatever I want in there. And so I got my assistant to come down from San Francisco, and he took all the middle seats out of the studio and painted all the curtains black and put a deck in there. And it was we packed up everything in San Francisco, moved down to Oxnard, and I got a little house in Ventura. And so I had a cool little kind of house on the side of the hill there, and the Teatro became kind of like a cool little workshop for us. And
there is a picture in there. It looks like the setup is, you could see the theater seats, and then it looks like you could see where the movie screen would be.
Yeah, the movie screen was still intact, and it had the projector booth was there. And I just went to like thrift shops and got like 16 millimeter projectors, and I had them all in the projector booth, and I would project on the screen. I had this little remote from Home Depot that you use to turn your lamps on in your house. Well, I had it connected to the projector, so I could turn on all 6 or 2. Or I had these old driver's ed films that were car driving around Miami, and then I had these old Russian films, black and white. So the car would be driving, and these Russian faces in black and white would come out of them. So it was very psychedelic. And then I had I discovered that there was a Army surplus store a couple of up the block from us. So I went in there, and they had these weather balloons. And so I started experimenting with that. So I blew up these weather balloons. They were like 20 feet round, and I had some old piping left over from the air conditioning system. And so I put them on these pieces of pipe, and then it looked like big lollipops. And then I would project from behind them. I had these loops of these angels. And so they were just spinning a loop of this angel. And so from behind, when you project it from behind, it looked like it was inside the weather balloon, and it was like a hologram. Really cool. And then I would project, and I had a mirror ball. And so I would do playbacks, I would just turn all the lights out and then start the films. And so it was like, it created this cool environment. The Teatro and Kingsway were kind of like long-term installations, I call them. And so usually I just kind of like, I do installations per record. And so I'll just kind of find a location. I've just been doing like Airbnb rentals and finding cool houses. And there's a great one in Malibu. It was called Raven's Eye. And and so it's got like a 3-story high glass window. It looks out over the ocean, and it's like, and so the guy that owned that house, he had it on Airbnb. And so I rented it for a couple of days to track the record. And the guy was a movie producer, and he produced a lot of those James Bond movies. So the house came with an Aston Martin, and the Golden Gun was there. And it was like living in this layer of, like you really felt like a spot.
Has anybody approached you about doing a TV series on this?
Yeah. There's 2 people that are trying to get funding to kind of put a documentary. So all based off the book. So
you recorded at that one venue in Oxnard with Bob Dylan, right? For that was where 1997's Time Out of Mind, which I love that album. It
started there, and at a point Bob was like, this is too close to my house, we got to go to somewhere far away. And so we ended up going to Miami, and then so we tracked most of the record in Miami, and then we came back to the Teatro and did more overdubs and mixed it. I mixed it, the whole thing there.
Okay, so because there's some great shots of you working together. One where you and Dylan are sharing a laugh. And do you have any stories you can share of recording with Bob for that album?
Well, it would be mostly just me and Bob just sitting at the console, and so he would always the record started in that Teatro with him just playing some songs that he had. He would go to the piano, and he would play Peace and but he wouldn't sing. He would just kind of play the piano. He goes, "What do you think of that song?" And Daniel would say, "Well, that's great, but I need to hear some lyrics." And so the next day we were mixing this live record from the House of Blues, the Olympics. Bob had done a show there, so he asked us to mix this show, asked me to mix it. So it ended up that Bob would come in every day and to listen to what we had. And then there was one song that had a harmonica on it. And he said, "Can you make that harmonica sound electric?" And I said, yeah. And so it ended up that I put the harp vocal mic through a little Ibanez tube screamer and into a little amp. And then so it made it like an old blues record. So, but after he stopped playing his harmonica, he started singing in it. And so when he heard his voice coming through it, it's like, wow, I want that on everything. And so I had to remix the whole record with his vocal amp on this thing. So when we started making the record, he wanted to use the vocal amp. So he'd always come to the console and sit down and you say, "What percentage is my vocal?" And I say, "It's 60-40, 40 being your vocal amp, 60 being your, no, make it 50-50. He really wanted that amp sound in there. That's why it's got that kind of gravelly sound. And so that became the signature sound of his voice for the Time Out of Mind. And so we always had like, 50-50, and sometimes it was even more amp. So the crazier it went. So.
And you did say you worked with them for the Oh Mercy album. That's 1989.
Yeah, that was in 89.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
this is cool too, because you got on a Harley and cruised around New Orleans with him, right?
Yeah.
Creative juices flowing.
Yeah. So I kept a couple of Harleys in the backyard, and I'd always kind of be tinkering about on them when he came into the studio. And he just walked up to me one day and he goes, "Hey, Mark, can you get me one of those bikes?" I said, "Yeah, my buddy in Florida's got a whole bunch of these cool vintage bikes." And he goes, "Yeah, can you get me one?" And I said, "Yeah." And I had my friend send a little Polaroid of a 1966 Harley Davidson Electra Glide. And it was like this beautiful electric blue. And so he goes, "Yeah, I want that one." And so I said, "All right." So I went to Florida on the weekend and picked up this bike and I brought it. And so when we started on the next Monday, he came early to see the bike. And so he goes, "Wow." And so I said, "Yeah, hop on it." And it was the first year of electric start for Harley Davidson. So it was kind of a unique bike. And so I'd ride with him because I had a knucklehead at the time, Harley Davidson. And so I would take him up along the levee and then down, and we would drive out and through the countryside and stuff like that. So yeah, so I showed him where to kind of ride, and so he would start taking rides by himself and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool. And I think early on he didn't realize like how we were working, and I think he was questioning a lot of the things that we were doing. And I think by taking the rides, it kind of cleared his head, and he kind of saw, okay, wow, this is kind of a cool idea. And
yeah. I heard a musician just recently talk about how there's a period in their career early on where songs just come to them one after the other. Where they come from, they don't know. But then they reach that point where then they have to kind of go to it, which is sounds like that's where he was at that point, looking to mix things up, trying to get some inspiration. And that's what did it.
Yeah, exactly. And, working with Neil Young is the same way. It's like Neil, we'd call him up and like Neil only works 3 days before the full moon. So we would call him up and he'd be in Hawaii and we'd say, "Any new songs yet?" And he'd say, "No." He goes, "I'm sitting here over the rabbit hole and nothing's coming out." And he ended up the next moon cycle that came through. He goes, "I got this joint here that I wrote this song, Highlander and was it Highway? Was it Highway? Can't remember. But anyway, so he had written the song on this joint and he put it out. He says, "I want to record on it." So he goes, "Here's the joint I wrote it on." And so we smoked that and we recorded the song on it, and it was pretty cool.
I love it. Well, What about acoustics? Are your ears tuned into the acoustics when you walk into these locations?
What I look for is more of kind of noises than acoustics, because I do like places that have really high ceilings, definitely. And that's pretty important for me because I can get away with a lot of stuff with a higher ceiling than a shorter ceiling. But
how do you mean? But how does that work
like
with higher ceiling?
Show, I could have a drum set up with a bass player playing a stand-up bass, and because the ceiling is 30 feet high, the sound never comes really back into the mics. When it's a short ceiling, the sound's got nowhere else to go but into the mics. So you could solo that upright bass right beside the drummer and not hear any drums. It's pretty cool. That's always been, I always look for that when I'm looking for locations. And, the Raven's Eye was perfect there in Malibu because it was like 3 stories high. And but I always look for another thing, which is noise, like magnetic field is really important because like I use a lot of old tube amps and tube mics. And so the ballasts in fluorescent lights make everything buzz. And so you got to make sure they're turned off, or the dimmers on a wall or something like that. Or outside, there could be a big transformer like hanging right outside the studio, and that would just give you all kinds of noise, using tube stuff. And a lot of electronic stuff is really irritated by transformers.
Do you have a favorite engineer or producer, like when you grew up, Glyn Johns or?
I really didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
I just, it was just, I never really looked into who was making what records. I was just like, I just loved certain, Led Zeppelin, Kashmir, and all that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of, although you had the record cover and it said all that stuff, I never really paid much attention to it until, I decided that's what I wanted to do at like 15. And remember, right in the school, like you had to see a guidance teacher, and so I went in and she says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a record producer. And so I ended up, I was lucky. I just kind of right time, right place kind of thing, and bumped into Daniel Lanois, and he had just come off making a Joshua Tree record and Peter Gabriel's Soul record. He was high on the horse, and so I just kind of jumped under his wing there, and he invited me to New Orleans to make a record with the Neville Brothers, which was the Yellow Moon record. And so I went down there, and he was there for 2 days. I'd never been out of Canada. Well, I've been to England and stuff, but never into America. And so I got transplanted into New Orleans, and he stayed there for 2 days. He says, you need to find a place to make the Neville Brothers record. You need to get all the gear in from England, New York, and Canada. So I had to bring a console in from England, a matchless British console, and then I had to bring the Studer A80 machine from Canada, and then get all of the outboard gear from New York, and I had to figure out how to get it all shipped to New Orleans, and like had to how to import, outport. So I became like a importer, outporter. I became like a real estate agent to find locations and make deals on houses and stuff like that.
A lot of stuff.
I was wearing many hats, and I was by myself. I was 20 years old. I had no computer. I had a phone book, and Dan gave me like 3 numbers to call, to get the console and the gear,
The Raven's Eye in Malibu, you mentioned it. Wow. I mean, this place is beautiful. Yeah, you recorded an album there in 2017, and you write, having always been infatuated with architecture, I had noticed this house on the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. Now, how could you not notice it, right? I mean, this is stunning. Huge arc windows overlooking the ocean. What style of architecture is this? I mean, is it?
He's actually, I can't remember his name right now, but he was a very famous architect here in LA and did a lot of like beautiful houses. And right across the way from there was another one called Eagle's Watch. And so after we had tracked the record there, I think I was paying like $1,500 a day on Airbnb, and then so we didn't need such a big place to do overdubs and do singing and stuff. So I moved into this other one, and it looked like a boat coming out of the side of the mountain in Malibu, and that had glass windows that went all the way around. You'd see whales go by and sharks and
oh my god, yeah. There's a shot of the band playing, and you can see a huge arch-like window where you can see out into the ocean. Oh yeah, I mean that is another stunning house you noticed is the Eagle's Watch, which is what you mentioned. That overlooks the Pacific Ocean. Sun rays beaming through the window. You can feel the warmth just looking at the photos. How does an environment like this affect the overall sound of a recording? I mean, can it shift a song's energy from the time it's presented to when it's finished?
I think something like that can be, inspiring again. You're in a relaxed environment, and you got some beautiful things to sing to or look out to the ocean, like better than being in a glass booth in a studio where you have to listen through headphones to talk to the producer and the thing, where you just can stand and it's open and you just can have the music on loud and do your vocals that way. And it's more inspiring,
Recording Icons, Creative Spaces, The Creative World of Mark Howard. It's out now. And we have Mark Howard with us. There's a Los Angeles studio where you recorded music with Neil Young, Robert Plant, among many others, and that is Bella Vista. Neil Young worked with you at this location for his 2010 album, Les Noise.
Yeah.
And some beautiful shots in the book, close-ups of Neil belting out his vocals. And there was something you did regarding his guitar sound on this album that got a big grin out of Neil. What was that?
Before Neil had even shown up, we were kind of like doing some tests. What's the best acoustic guitar, because it was meant to be just an acoustic record. And so we had like this beautiful old Guild guitar, and we tried different pickups and which was the best one. And Neil was bringing his acoustic, which he calls Hank, and it's a beautiful old Gibson too. And so we were kind of like trying to find what would be the best thing. And so because I like to experiment with sounds, I dialed in this sound on his acoustic using a sub box that I use. It's a sub harmonizer, really. And so I put it on his acoustic. And so when he hit that low string, it was like having a bass player playing along, boom, 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 and it was like, and I had, 2 18-inch subs aside and stacked Dyna audio speakers. It was like quite a playback system. And so it would move his pant leg. I would watch his pant leg every time he would hit that low string. His pant leg would move, and just when you feel that sub and you just feel it on your body, it's like it's just that feels great. So he kind of fell in love with it, and then he decided. That song was called "Hitchhiker," by the way. That he was smoking his joint.
Okay,
and exactly. He had plugged into these two their 1950s Tweed Deluxe amps, and so I had the same system set up from doing the acoustic thing, but I had accidentally left that sub on his guitar channel. So when he hit that electric guitar, it created this like thunderous sound. It's like he never felt his guitar feel like that ever before. And he was just like, this big smile on his face. And so he just stood in the doorway. We had the doors open, the windows are rattling. I had to tape all the windows down because they were just like rattling so loud. And so I think the whole of Silver Lake definitely heard that record.
There's some close-up shots of Neil here.
Yeah.
Who takes these pictures? Is this?
So those aren't taken. They're video prints. So originally what it was is Elliot Roberts was Neil's manager, and he was also Daniel Lanois' manager at the same time. So Elliot had shown Neil these videos that we were doing, for a record called Black Dub. So we would do these takes of the recording of the song, but then film the recording live at the same time. So, and then I would just do a mix right after that, drop that in with the video, and then that was like these videos that we're making that were live with the black and white film with it. And so he saw those and he goes, I want to do that for my record. And so they hooked up, and so Neil would come in and he brought all of his stuff, and that's kind of how it started.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. What's the shot with you? You're hanging with The Edge, and I think that's Bono?
That's
all of them in that photo above?
Yeah. That's Bono and Mila Jovovich. So I had done a record called $1 Million Hotel. Bono had written, and our friend Wim Wenders shot it, right? So Wim Wenders is, amazing director and stuff. So he did that, and so I was mixing a bunch of songs, Ground Beneath Her Feet, and another one called Stateless, which is all U2's tracks, and then the rest of the soundtrack was all done by all different other musicians, but definitely under the wings of Bono and stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of like how they're in there, and the shot of me and Edge, it's just kind of, we're listening to a playback, and we just happen to both have like shirts that looked at.
Oh yeah, and you got the Mac laptop open, and yeah, you sound like you are. Then there's someone else there with you.
That's Daniel Lanois.
That is Lanois.
He's in a wheelchair. He got into a motorcycle accident and broke all his ribs, and so he was pretty medicated. So we just kind of would roll him in the room.
There are pictures throughout this book of a woman. One's on looks like she's on your motorcycle. She's not wearing anything.
Yeah. That's Renee. It's a friend of ours, and so I've got a really beautiful vintage. It's called a Vincent Black Shadow, and it's like one of the most sought after motorcycles in the world. And so I had acquired it in LA, and we were doing some photos, and Renee was doing the photos, a shoot up there at the house where we were making the record. And I said, Renee, would you do a nude on my bike? She goes, yeah, sure. Took all her clothes off.
That's great.
It's LA. Anything goes here.
Exactly. Like, yeah. Right. Yeah. And then,
yeah, it was a beautiful shot. And so,
as I scroll down, I see Mr. Robert Plant there, and he's reading. It looks like he's got a book, or he's working on his lyrics or something. Yeah. It's nighttime. He's got his glasses on the edge of his nose. Appears to be working on some lyrics.
He walked in with a satchel and a bunch of books, and
William Blake, right? William Blake poetry.
So he had this William Blake book, and he's like an amazing writer, and so he was always like looking at the William Blake book, and that's a good line, like just kind of taking down some ideas and stuff, which we ended up using. And so I think it's but he said in the satchel, he goes, in the satchel I have all the songs of all the women I have loved and hated. I thought, that's going to be good stuff for lyrics.
Which album? Was this the one he made?
It was for Robert Plant and Alison Krauss.
Raising Sand.
Raising Sand
2. Yeah.
So they started with T-Bone Burnett, and they didn't like where it was going. So Lanois got the call to kind of do it, and so we were supposed to start with both of them, but Allison couldn't make it because she was sick, and so Robert came in by himself, and we tracked 5 songs with him, just kind of like us in the room using loops and all kinds of crazy stuff, and they sounded amazing. And Robert, because I'm not sure if you noticed, but on the Raising Sand, he sings quite down low, because he's old now. He's got a little lower thing. And I was like, come on, can you sing up high like you were on those Led Zeppelin records? He goes, I can't do that anymore. And so we were doing this one song, and he was going for it. And I said, see, you can do it still. And he gave it a try, and it sounded like,
Well, do you remember the reunion show he did, the Ahmet Ertegun show?
Yeah.
He was.
But I don't think he was as high as what he was, but
but he was pretty damn good in that show.
Yeah, he was doing pretty good.
But that's what I love about Robert Plant, though, is he knows how to work within his range, and he creates this amazing music based around where he's at, not just vocally, but mind, heart, and soul. He's never been one to just go back and do the nostalgia thing. He's always pushing forward.
Well, he said, like Led Zeppelin, they were a folk band,
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of dulcimers and old, like kind of more Celtic instruments in there, and a lot of those Led Zeppelin records. What
were those Zeppelin stories he told you, though? Because you mentioned in the book.
Yeah. Well, the movie, what was it called? Spinal Tap. There's a scene in Spinal Tap where the band's underneath the stadium, and they're like, look, here's we can't know, and they were lost under there. And
hello, Cleveland.
Robert said, that really happened to us. We were lost under the stadium. We couldn't find our way to the stage. And so I thought that was pretty funny. And he just loves to tell stories of, when, Bonham, they came to Hollywood, and Bonham would go down to the Whiskey A Go-Go, and he'd be screaming at the drummer, you fucking suck.
There are classic Bonzo stories. Yeah. He had a few in him.
The wild one. And so, but Robert had lost his son early on, so they were on a tour, and they had to cancel the tour once his son died, and so I think once that happened, it kind of like changed his whole kind of thing, because he said, I was doing so much cocaine, that I would have my own private cocaine. I would have cocaine to play, with other people, but I would have my own. He said my whole face was always frozen. It took the death of his son to stop him from doing drugs. So he said he just went back to England and with his wife and stuff. And he said, like, the only person that came to visit me was, John Bonham, and where the other guys, they never came to say hello, like, how you doing or whatever.
Wow.
Like after his son. So I think he kind of like got shied away from them, maybe because of that, and so I think after that, that's kind of how it all kind of stopped, right?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I love the story you tell about producer Brian Eno while you're recording at, I think it's pronounced Emla Court
Emla Court, yeah.
in New Orleans. Emla.
Yeah. So it was owned by an old kind of like oil baron guy there, and so he named it after, took the first letter of one of his daughters, and it spelled Emla, and so Brian's a master of this keyboard called the Yamaha DX7, and in its day it was like the keyboard synthesizer, and it was all new, but he would go in there and change all the algorithms and stuff like that and come up with all of his own sounds. And I think they used that a lot on a lot of those early ambient records that he was making. So he had this one sound that sounded like insects, like cicadas, that go, and it had this high pitched noise. And so I was working with him in the morning on the Neville Brothers Yellow Moon record. We were working on God on Our Side. And so he was putting some bells in there and then putting some of these ambient sounds in there. And so he played this one little melody thing on the DX7 that sounded like insects. And then I had the window open, and the cicadas outside went. I go, did you hear that? He goes, yeah. I said, try a different melody. And the bugs went. And like, oh my God, he's communicating with insects. And it was like,
what a trip.
Yeah, it was a big trip.
Yeah, speaking of that, the Neville Brothers record, that's the one that was recorded on the second floor using percussion loops, right? There's pictures of this. Yeah. I think that's what we're seeing in the photos here, right? They're on the second floor. It was
a big living room that I had set up with a drum set with Willie Green's kit and the organ and all that. And we ended up just working right in the bedroom, which was the control room. And all the brothers would just stand there with mics and they would just sing. And we kind of like, and with the tape recorder, you can do stuff that you record it fast and you play it back at halftime. And so there was a lot of songs like Voodoo that was done really fast percussion loops, and then we slowed it down to, and it made it this haunting kind of like vibe. You take that, and then they would sing on top of it, and we do beautiful guitar kind of slide work on it, and so it had this chilling, haunting voodoo type of sound to it. And so live, there's super energy, and they're like, it's like people are dancing and stuff. So it's hard to take that and make a record from it because you don't have an audience. So by coming at it from a different angle, doing percussion loops and using kind of different type of sounds, it makes for an interesting record,
Now we get to another interesting one, the small schoolhouse. Tom Waits, he recorded music in a small schoolhouse. This is in a little town in California called Valley Ford. And I think in that first photo there, you can see where the chalkboard would be, right? There's a little tiny spot. This was Tom's idea, right?
So I had him come to the Paramore, and he was like, wow, this place. And so he showed up with this little 4-track cassette. He'd been going into his bathroom and like doing these kind of like mouth rhythms, like, and then he had a pan and he'd hit it with a stick and like dong, dong, dong. And so it was like these bizarre sounding things. And so he had no way to get it off his 4-track cassette and listen. So he came to the Paramore, and I put it all on a CD for him. And he sat there and we went through each one, and we named them, and they all had kind of like cling, clang, boom, and like weird names that were like reference to
that only you would know.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. And then and so he says, well, I can't work here. I'm too far away from the family. And he said, would you come up to where I live and look at this little schoolhouse that's at the end of my road? Because usually he's got to drive 2 or 3 hours to Prairie Sound, which is the closest studio to him, I think it is. And so and I said, well, I could bring my whole rig from here, from the Paramore up to up there. And so it just happened to be that the room at the Paramore was exactly the same size as the schoolroom that they had. And so it was more of kind of like a hall that they would have, like, meetings at and stuff like that now, because it wasn't a schoolhouse, but it was a schoolhouse, and it had a girl's bathroom and a boy's bathroom, and a little kitchenette and stuff like that, which was pretty cool. So I went up there and I said, wow, my footprint here is I could bring everything in. So I get everything out of the Paramore and put in a big truck and drove it up there, and by myself, put a Harley Davidson in the back, so I had something to ride while I was there. And so I got there, and it's just Tom and his kids were there, and so Tom and the kids, they all helped me unload the whole truck into this little schoolhouse, and then I set it all up, and I had these Moroccan tents. They were purple, and and so I hung them inside the schoolhouse, so it was like recording in like these like a Moroccan tent,
Right?
So, but they had events that were booked in there, like they had to bring in. They were doing something like the best hog, or people that had the best pig. They were voting on them, and so I had to tear everything down and for a weekend, and then set it back up because they had this pig thing going on.
Oh my God, it's a tight fit too. Everything's packed in tight there. If you look at these photos.
Yeah. So, but most of the record kind of, I told Tom, I said, once we get all set up, and we'll use my expensive microphones and all the stuff that we can get better sounds than the 4-track that you got. And I said, all right. But I couldn't better the sound of the 4-track with my, beautiful old microphones and all of my preamps. And it was the sound of the Tascam. And I ended up just bouncing those 4 tracks onto my multi-track system. And that's how we use them. And so a lot of it is these kind of like mouth rhythms, and nothing would glue to it. Like we tried putting a piano, no, it didn't work. We tried organ, no. And he goes, I got it. And he brings out this big pod. He goes, this works on everything. It's like big old African pod, like like 400 years old or something.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the sound that we put on top of these mouth rhythms and make them sound pretty crazy.
Man, you've worked with some brilliant artists, including Joni Mitchell, which is this is towards the end of the book here. This is interesting. You remixed her first record, Songs to a Seagull, and you set up in her living room, and she told you stories for hours about her paintings. I think one of those paintings is in the book.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And how she felt abandoned by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. She was telling you stories like that. And
exactly.
Yeah. Any good stories you can share?
She herself a musician. She considers herself a painter. She's an artist first. That's her whole thing. And she would just sit there chain smoking, and Stephen Stills had produced her first record, and as she put it, Stephen Stills misproduced her record. He made her double all of her guitar lines. And so ever since that first record, she'd hated that record, Songs of Seagull. And so she said, would you get the masters, remix it, and just put my voice and the original guitar there? I don't want that double in there. And she never liked it, because I think her first 4 records are just her and acoustic guitar singing, right? They're really stripped down to her. And so so I remixed it, and while I was doing that, she says, I've got these other songs that I want Brian Blade, this drummer from New Orleans, to come in and play some drums on, because they only got percussion on them, and so she'd like to hear it with a drum set. And so she wouldn't leave her house, so I brought the studio to her house in Bel Air, and so I set up a whole system in there, and we would do a take, and then she would just go off and start talking, and it would be like an hour, and like, we got to get back to recording, Joni.
What are some of the fun stories she told you? You got any good ones?
It was just all kinds of crazy stuff from when she she had a baby early on and she'd given it up, and nobody knew about it. And that baby had come back, many years later, and just appeared, on her doorstep kind of thing. And so she had to kind of like gather her whole thing, that her baby had come back, and stories you don't hear about, because she kept them covered up for all those years.
You've worked in a small schoolhouse, mansions, movie theaters, and also an old church converted into a bed and breakfast. This is in Australia with Sam Roberts. This would be for his '06 album, Chemical City. He wrote and recorded his hit single, Bridge to Nowhere there. Can you talk about this experience? You not only lived there with Sam Roberts and his band, but there were some spiders and frogs and snakes that like to hang out.
Well, this record kind of started off in Montreal. And so I went to Montreal and we were working there, and Sam's a surfer, and he goes, I'd like to make my record somewhere that I can surf and where it's warm in January. I said, well, Australia is really the only place that would work for you to be able to surf. I said, there's a place in Australia called Byron Bay that's like it's got 5 surf points along this kind of like along the ocean, and you can do a different surf break every day if you wanted. And so I tried to convince the record company that we were going to go to Australia and make the record there. And the A&R guy goes, you're not going to Australia. You're not going to go and smoke weed and party and not come back with a record. And I said, you know what? I said, I think it's a good time. And so they wouldn't do it. And so I didn't think it was going to happen. And then 2 weeks before, I had lined everything up. I found that church. I found my friends who were in a band called Midnight Oil that runs a hire company. So he had like all Neve equipment that I could use, and he'd loan me a console and speakers. And so I had it all set up, and then the record company says no. And then Sam talked to them and said, look, I'm doing this. This is where I want to do. And so they ended up agreeing on it. And so there was no songs. He had no songs written. And he says, look, I'm going to go to South Africa, and I'm going to write all the songs for the record there. And I'm going to, see my family there, and I'll do all the writing. And so I said, okay, cool. So I flew with all my gear down to Australia, and then got it all set up. And then I went to go pick up Sam and his girlfriend at the airport coming in from South Africa, and, we're loading in. So we're walking back to the car, and I said, Sam, how'd you do with songs? And he goes, not so good. I said, oh no, what? Did you forget your songs? Like, did you leave your book in South Africa? And he goes, no. I go, what is it? Like, he goes, I didn't write any songs. I'm like, what? You have no songs? He said, nope.
Oh.
I said, all right, well, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. And so I came up with this thing called seeds. What ideas do you got? And so that's one seed. And then this is another seed. So he had this concept. It was kind of like to make it a concept, Bridge to Nowhere, this place, and the song, we would build the songs around this and the adventures that happened in the city and all this stuff. So I did a week with them, kind of doing these seeds. And I think there's another guy from Canada, Matt Mays, I think his name was, and he just happened to be in Australia surfing in Byron Bay. And so Sam knew him, so he came over, and he's a singer-songwriter too. So he helped us develop some songs. So it was just 3 of us in there working on these seeds. And then the band showed up. And so I had a rough time because his band is all of his friends from high school. And so he made his first record, Sam, all by himself. He played everything, played drums, played guitars, bass, did it all. And that's why it sounds so cool, his first record. And so now it's with his band, and they're a little sloppy. And, I'm used to working with studio musicians, and I'm frustrated. And his drummer just quit, and they hired this guy, Billy, who only had one beat, and he could only play it really loud. And I got kind of hit by, sideswiped a little bit. I like, how am I going to build this with this band? And so I kind of had to like use a little bit of the Neville thing, or building it with loops and stuff like that on a couple of tracks, or started off small and build on top of it. But to track live with everybody in the room, it was getting difficult. That people are, I didn't get any good takes that I thought should be, because I'm used to a certain level of musicianship. And so But it ended up we came up with some great songs. And so the record company, once I was done in Australia, they hated it. We don't even want to put this out. And Sam goes, it's done. And like, we're not putting this out. And so Sam went in there with somebody else and reworked some of his vocals. Sam would surf every morning, and he would come back, and the salt water had messed with his voice. So his voice had changed. He didn't sound like Sam Roberts. He sounded like this gravelly guy. And I kind of dug the sound of it. I thought, wow, this is cool. But the record company, they didn't like it. And Sam tried to explain, look, it's, it's kind of more of a kind of concept record. And these songs are all meant to be like this. And they said, no, we're not taking that. And so it ended up that he just redid some, I had gone to Montreal and redid some drums with their new drummer, Josh, who's amazing. And then he re-sang a bunch of stuff. But it's pretty much there, the tracks and everything, but they just kind of rebuilt some of them, had somebody else do the work. And
yeah, I mean, it was a critical and commercial success.
I think it was his best-selling record.
Yeah.
After the record company saying they didn't like it. And
so, but yeah, there were spiders and frogs and snakes across the way.
Yeah. So there was these green frogs that lived in the toilet. So when you sat on the toilet, their arms would come up and touch your butt. You'd be like, ah! But right behind the toilet is like this funnel web spider that had been living there, like the most dangerous spider in the world. And so you had to do your business and get out quick.
Oh my God! And the snakes didn't get in, but they were across the way, right? They tried getting in.
Yeah, we were driving down the road for them to go surfing, and I felt like I drove over like a hose or something. Ba-bum, ba-bum. And we stopped the car, looked back, and there's this python slithering across the road. We didn't kill it or anything; it just kept going. And then we had mangoes outside of the studio church. And you could hear them at night, flying there and eating the mangoes. And so I would walk to the cafe every day, and there was a dead one on the side of the road, and they were the size of a cat. They were massive, with wings. I'm like, that's the bats here. It was crazy.
Oof. Yeah.
And they have these things called huntsman spiders. They're like the size of your hand, and they're just like stuck there on the wall. And so they're not dangerous at all, but they look like the scariest spider you ever saw. And so Sam had one in his room, so he came out screaming like a girl. So I was the one that had to go and get it out of there. So I just went and got a cup and stuck it on the wall and slid something in behind, take him out, put him outside gently. And then we had this kangaroo. They're called joeys, which they're small kangaroos, and I would always leave the back door open. So this little joey would come hop in the morning, and he would open the door, hop in, go to the fridge, take some fruit out, and then hop back out. And it was like if you didn't disturb him, you could just sit there.
God, I love it.
Right in front of you. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about one last place that you recorded in, which is the old radio propaganda building in East Berlin, and this is with the band Kaiser's Orchestra. Hitler had been noted to visit there while orchestras played live, and made a record with them in the cold months of November, December 2007. And the album, I believe, is titled Mascaneri.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, okay, that went to number one. Yeah, and there's a shot in the book that shows just how huge this place is. Yeah. What was that experience like? What kind of vibes did you get when you first walked into that place, knowing its history?
I thought it was incredible. But the place had been not demolished, but broken into. They stole the pianos. Everything had been taken out of there. So it was just raw rooms. There was nothing in there.
We talk about high ceilings. This is high ceiling.
The size of a New York City block. It was really incredibly big. And then there was like what's called the bridge. You can see two little windows there. And that's the bridge that they would where they would broadcast the orchestras live to radio. And then on the other side was another room the same size that there was another orchestra in. So when this orchestra finished, this orchestra would start up. So they would have a break on this one because they play for 20 minutes or whatever, and then the other one would start and stuff like that. So it was incredible. And so it was like the Russians had built it as a radio propaganda, and then Hitler was known to kind of come through there and listen to the orchestras and stuff like that, and all his generals and stuff.
Some
So,
vibes in there, huh?
yeah, it was pretty. And I had been to Checkpoint Charlie, and I bought this Russian hat, and so I always wore this Russian hat around the studio. And the Norwegian film crew came in, and they're like, "I'm just wearing this cap." They're looking at me, going,
That's you with a schnitzel shirt. Is that
yeah.
you?
Oh yeah, in Germany, you order a pizza and it comes with schnitzel on top. You order Thai food, it comes with a schnitzel on top. I'm like, what's with this schnitzel thing? And so I always was making fun of schnitzel and schnitzel this and schnitzel that.
Man.
And so they bought me a shirt that said schnitzel. Yeah.
You included some photos of you with Peter Gabriel there. You mentioned him early on in the interview. You worked with him in the late 80s, early 90s for the album Us.
Yeah.
And
So
what are the photos that we're seeing in this book? It looks like
that's his studio in Bath, England. And so the first one, I'm just sitting him. We're at an In Excess concert, and
that's okay. It looked like you were in a
stadium.
seats at a concert.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Wembley Stadium. And then the other photos are him in the studio, his studio in Bath. And so he came to New Orleans, and I did a bunch of horns on what's it called? Washing of the Water, and a bunch of other songs we kind of in place. We were trying to like get the sound of New Orleans on that record. So
Another brilliant artist, man. You've worked with some.
yeah. And it's so weird. Like, when you hear him sing, it's like, that's the guy, he's like, that's his voice. It's pretty incredible. I always thought, they may have kind of had effects on it, but no, he sings like that. It's pretty cool.
Any location or building that you haven't worked in yet that you hope to, that you'd like to?
I'm going to go look at one pretty soon. I'm going to Thailand, and I've always wanted to work in a temple. One of those so my friend lives in Thailand, so he's going to show me a couple of locations in Thailand that I might be able to use, make a record in a temple. And so I thought that would be the ultimate, I worked in Russia in a castle there, and then made a record in their cathedral. And so I think now it's time to try a temple.
Yeah.
I don't have an artist for it yet, but I just want to see what's available. And so I can, if I find somebody along the way, I'll say, hey, let's go to Thailand, and it's cheap there, and we can make a cool record and be in the middle of the jungle and have some elephants around.
Yeah. How often have you worked in a quote unquote regular studio?
Not a lot. I feel really uneasy in those places, having to push this button and talk to somebody through glass. Communication is lost. I'm always kind of frustrated, trying to get a hold of somebody out on the floor and they don't have their headphones on, or just trying to communicate something as simple as just turn down or sing a little quieter. Something simple. Where I work in the same room with everybody, and I can just kind of say, hey, Peter, just kind of like a little quieter coming into the chorus and bring it up. It's like, where otherwise it's hard to explain that, through glass and they're in a different booth and not paying attention, and you have more communication, more attention, and it's a lot easier to kind of communicate.
So the book is out now, Recording Icons, Creative Spaces, The Creative World of Mark Howard, and it's through ECW Press, available wherever books are sold. Where can people find you online?
MH Real Music is my Instagram. You can find me there, and Mark Howard on Facebook, I think. Yeah.
Put the links on the show notes page so people can
go buy the book, everybody, and it makes for a really great coffee table book. And
absolutely, yeah.
So I'm on tour right now with Jeff Beck and Johnny Depp. I produced a record for this guy Max Gomez, and so they loved what they heard of him. So they asked him to open all the shows. So I'm out there mixing his shows, and now working with Max, we're just I'm kind of recording some live shows, all the shows for a live record. So it's been really good. Props
to Johnny, man. He's getting back on his feet again, and all his buddies in music, man, they stuck with him.
Yeah, everybody's there. Everybody was there last night at the LA show, so they're supporting him. It's good.
Outstanding. This was so fun, Mark. I really appreciate it. And people should go out and get this book, man. The pictures are awesome. The stories are awesome. It's a must buy.
Hey, great.
See you, Mark.
All right, cheers. Bye.
And thanks as always for listening. I'm Eric Senich. Join me again next time for another brand new episode of Booked on Rock.
That's it. It's in the books.